"You're a disgrace to this pack." The words hit Kira like a physical blow, sharp and precise as the morning frost that clung to the training ground's wooden posts. She felt them settle into her chest, adding another layer to the armour of worthlessness she had been building her entire life. Beta Marcus stood above her, his massive brown wolf panting with satisfaction at having easily pinned her smaller form to the frozen earth. Kira pushed herself up from the dirt, her wolf Ember snarling silently within her mind. The silver-grey she-wolf had never learned the art of submission that came so naturally to every other pack member. Even now, as Kira dusted the mud from her torn training clothes, Ember refused to lower her head in acknowledgement of the beta's dominance. "Look at me when I'm speaking to you," Marcus commanded, his alpha authority pressing against Kira's consciousness like a heavy weight. Around them, the other unmated wolves watched with a mixture of pity and disgust. This was morning pack training, and once again Kira had failed to demonstrate the basic submission responses that even pups mastered within their first year. Kira raised her eyes to meet the beta's cold stare, but inside her mind, Ember stood tall and defiant. The wolf's golden eyes blazed with an ancient fire that Kira had never understood. Where other wolves instinctively lowered themselves before higher-ranking pack members, Ember simply stared back with regal composure, as if she were the one being insulted by this crude display of dominance. 20 years you've lived in this pack," Marcus continued, his voice carrying across the training ground so that every wolf present could hear. 20 years, and your wolf still refuses to show proper respect. Tell me, Kira, what use is a she-wolf who cannot submit? The question hung in the air like a death sentence. Kira had heard variations of it her entire life. What use was she indeed, when her wolf's defiance made her unsuitable for mating, unsuitable for any position of trust within the pack hierarchy, unsuitable for anything except the kitchen duties and cleaning tasks that kept her fed and sheltered but barely alive? "I'm sorry, Beta," she whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. But even as she spoke the required apology, Ember's presence within her mind remained unbroken, unbowed, untouchable. Marcus shook his head in disgust. "Get out of my sight. Report to the kitchens where you belong." He turned to address the other young wolves, all of whom had successfully demonstrated their ability to submit when commanded. "Let this be a lesson to all of you. A wolf who cannot bow to authority cannot be trusted with anything that matters." Kira walked away from the training ground with her head down, aware of the stares following her retreat. She had learned long ago that invisibility was her best defense against the pack's contempt. If she could just fade into the background, perform her menial tasks without drawing attention, perhaps she could survive another day without providing fresh entertainment for their cruelty. The pack house kitchens were already bustling with activity when she arrived. The head cook, a stern woman named Martha, who had never shown Kira anything but professional indifference, gestured toward a pile of root vegetables that needed peeling. "The Lunar Games start in 3 days," Martha said without looking up from her dough. "Extra mouths to feed, which means extra work. Try not to cut yourself this time." The Lunar Games. Kira's hands stilled on the potato she had been peeling. Every 3 years the pack held elaborate trials to test the strength, skill, and loyalty of their unmated wolves. It was a celebration of pack unity, a demonstration of their finest young members, and an opportunity for advantageous matings between families. It was also, traditionally, the most humiliating week of Kira's existence. "All unmated wolves are required to participate," Martha continued, apparently reading the dread in Kira's expression. "Pack law, no exceptions even for kitchen help." The potato slipped from Kira's numb fingers. Participating in the Lunar Games meant standing before the entire pack, before visiting dignitaries from allied territories, before potential mates and their families. It meant having her wolf's defiance displayed publicly, having her inadequacy witnessed by hundreds of spectators who would whisper about the broken she-wolf for years to come. Within her mind, Ember stirred restlessly. The silver wolf had always grown agitated during pack gatherings, as if the presence of so many other wolves offended her in some profound way. Kira had never understood why her wolf seemed to consider herself above the very pack that had raised and sheltered them both. "Martha," she said carefully, "surely there must be some exception, some way for wolves who are unsuitable to be excused from the trials." The older woman looked up sharply. "Unsuitable? Girl, you may be strange, but you're still a wolf. The games test more than just submission. There's combat, hunting, problem-solving. Your wolf may be defiant, but she's not weak. I've seen the way she moves when she thinks no one is watching." It was true. During the few moments when Kira allowed herself to partially shift, to let Ember's consciousness blend with her own, she felt a strength and grace that seemed impossible for someone of her low status. But that power always felt borrowed, temporary, like wearing clothes that belonged to someone else. "Besides," Martha added with a rare smile, "there are betting pools on whether you'll actually be allowed to compete. Half the pack thinks Beta Marcus will find an excuse to exclude you rather than risk the embarrassment. The other half wants to see what happens when your wolf finally breaks under pressure." Kira's stomach twisted. She was entertainment to them, nothing more. A curiosity to be studied and wagered upon. The freak with the broken wolf who had somehow survived 20 years in a pack that valued conformity above all else. As the day wore on, she found herself listening to fragments of conversation from the pack members who came through the kitchens. The excitement was building. Wolves from neighbouring territories would arrive tomorrow to witness the trials. There would be feasting, ceremonial hunts, formal presentations of the pack's finest young members to potential mates and allies. And somewhere in the middle of all that pageantry, Kira would be forced to stand before them all and demonstrate exactly why she had never belonged. That evening, alone in her small room in the servants' quarters, Kira sat before her cracked mirror and stared at her reflection. Her dark hair hung limp around a face that was neither beautiful nor particularly memorable. Her grey eyes held a wariness that came from years of expecting cruelty. She looked exactly like what she was, a nobody who had been allowed to exist on the edges of pack society through charity and pity. But when she let her consciousness sink deeper, when she touched the part of her mind where Ember lived, she saw something else entirely. Golden eyes that burned with ancient fire, a silver coat that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light, a bearing that spoke of nobility, of power, of absolute certainty in her own worth. The disconnect had always confused her. How could her human form be so thoroughly unremarkable while her wolf radiated such fierce pride? How could she feel so powerless in her daily life while Ember's presence within her mind felt capable of moving mountains? "What are you?" she whispered to her reflection, but only silence answered. 3 days until the Lunar Games began. 3 days until her wolf's defiance would be put on display for all to see. 3 days until she would be forced to face the truth that had haunted her entire life. She was broken, wrong, a mistake that should never have survived to adulthood. Within her mind, Ember lifted her silver head and howled, a sound of such profound loneliness that Kira felt tears begin to fall. Her wolf had never bowed to anyone, had never acknowledged the authority of any other creature in the pack. For 20 years that defiance had been a source of shame and isolation. Tomorrow, wolves from across the territory would arrive to witness the games. Important wolves, powerful wolves, wolves whose bloodlines stretched back to the founding of their species. They would see her failure, judge her inadequacy, and confirm what everyone already knew. She was nobody. She was nothing. She was a wolf who could not bow, and in 3 days the entire world would know it. The combat circle had been cleared of its ceremonial decorations, leaving only bare earth and ancient stones that had witnessed countless trials by combat over the centuries. Visiting alphas pressed forward in their seats, their earlier festive mood replaced by the predatory anticipation that always preceded bloodshed. This was no longer a political ceremony. This was primal werewolf law, asserting itself in its most violent form. Kira stood at one edge of the circle, her mother's silver robes replaced by simple fighting leathers that would not restrict her movement. The transformation from royal regalia to warrior's garb was symbolic as much as practical. She was no longer hiding behind ceremony or inherited authority. This battle would be won or lost on her own strength, her own skill, her own willingness to kill or die for the mate bond that had awakened her true nature. Across from her, Elena Ravencrest had also changed into combat gear, her emerald silk exchanged for black leather that emphasized her lean, predatory build. The woman who had tried to have Kira assassinated in her sleep now faced her in open combat, and the smile that curved her lips held no warmth, only the anticipation of a skilled killer about to end a threat permanently. "Before we begin," Elder Sage announced from her position as trial witness, "let the combatants state their claims for all to hear." Elena stepped forward, her voice carrying clearly across the silent arena. "I am Elena Ravencrest, daughter of House Ravencrest, trained warrior and rightful mate to the Alpha King. I fight to maintain the political alliances that keep our territories stable, to preserve the order that has brought peace to our people." She paused, her green eyes finding Kira across the circle. "And to end the chaos that threatens everything we have built." It was a clever declaration, positioning herself as the defender of stability against the disruption that Kira's very existence represented. Several of the visiting alphas nodded approvingly. They had come here expecting a routine political marriage, not a supernatural upheaval that threatened to overturn decades of careful alliance building. "I am Kira of the Silver Moon bloodline," Kira replied, her voice soft but carrying an authority that made every wolf present instinctively straighten. "Daughter of Luna Aria and Alpha Kieran, survivor of the assassination that was meant to end my family line forever. I fight to reclaim what was stolen, to restore the balance that was broken when lunar authority was murdered in its sleep." Her silver eyes blazed as she looked directly at Elena. "And to ensure that those who killed my parents face justice at last." The contrast between their declarations was stark. Elena fighting for political convenience, Kira fighting for blood justice and supernatural destiny. Through the mate bond, she could feel Darian's consciousness locked onto every word, his golden eyes burning with desperate hope that somehow, impossibly, she might prevail. "Let the trial begin," Sage announced. "Combat continues until one combatant yields, flees the circle, or dies. The moon goddess will judge the righteousness of each claim." Both women began to shift simultaneously, their human forms dissolving as their wolves emerged for battle. Elena's wolf was large and powerful, her dark brown fur marked with black that made her nearly invisible in shadows. She was a trained killer in wolf form as much as human, her movements fluid and controlled as she assessed her opponent for weaknesses. But when Kira completed her shift, gasps echoed through the crowd. Ember stood in the combat circle like a creature from legend. Her silver fur seemed to glow with its own inner light, and her golden eyes held depths of ancient fire that spoke of power beyond mere physical strength. She was larger than she had been during the trials, the complete breaking of the suppression spell having allowed her true size and magnificence to emerge. This was not just a wolf. This was a Luna in her full glory, radiating authority that made every other werewolf present feel small by comparison. Elena attacked without warning, her dark form launching across the circle with deadly precision. She aimed for Kira's throat in a move designed to end the fight immediately, before her opponent could bring any supernatural abilities to bear. But Ember was no longer the uncertain creature who had stumbled through combat trials. Lunar power flowed through her like liquid starlight, enhancing her speed and strength beyond anything Elena had prepared for. She flowed aside from the attack with impossible grace, her claws raking across Elena's flank as the darker wolf overextended herself, first blood to the silver moon air. Elena recovered quickly, her extensive combat training asserting itself as she circled for another attack. She had expected some improvement in her opponent's abilities, but the magnitude of Kira's transformation was clearly beyond her calculations. This was not the broken servant girl she had dismissed. This was something far more dangerous. For the next several minutes, the battle proceeded as a careful dance of attack and counterattack. Elena used her superior training and experience to control the tempo, forcing Ember to react rather than dictate the flow of combat. Blood began to show on both wolves' fur as claws found their marks, and teeth drew crimson lines across silver and brown alike. But something was wrong with Elena's strategy. Despite her skill and preparation, despite her years of training specifically for combat against supernatural opponents, she was not winning as decisively as she should have been. Ember seemed to anticipate her attacks before they fully formed, to know exactly where to be, to minimize damage while maximizing her own devastating counters. The truth hit Elena like a physical blow as she realized what she was facing. This was not just enhanced speed or strength, this was lunar authority manifesting in its most primal form. Ember was not predicting her attacks, she was reading Elena's intentions directly from her mind, using telepathic abilities that had been legend for so long that most werewolves had forgotten they ever existed. Desperation drove Elena to abandon careful technique in favor of overwhelming aggression. She launched a series of brutal attacks designed to overwhelm her opponent through sheer savagery, accepting damage in order to inflict more. Blood flew in crimson arcs as both wolves tore at each other with increasing violence, their snarls echoing across the silent arena. Then Elena made a critical mistake. In her desperation to land a decisive blow, she left herself exposed for a fraction of a second, just long enough for Ember to strike with surgical precision. Silver claws found the gap in Elena's guard, raking across her throat in a move that drew a fountain of blood and sent the dark wolf staggering. But instead of pressing her advantage, Ember suddenly went perfectly still. Power began to flow through her form like visible lightning, silver light cascading along her fur, as lunar authority awakened in its fullest manifestation. This was no longer just enhanced physical abilities. This was the primal force that had governed werewolf civilization before politics and pack hierarchies had diluted its purity. Elena tried to attack the motionless target, but found her body suddenly unresponsive. Lunar compulsion had seized control of her nervous system, the same authority that had once allowed the Silver Moon bloodline to command entire armies, now focused on a single enemy with lethal intensity. "Yield!" Ember commanded, and the word carried such power that several spectators in the closest seats actually whimpered in submission. This was not a request. It was a royal decree from a creature whose authority transcended normal pack hierarchies. Elena's wolf form shuddered as supernatural compulsion warred with trained resistance. For a moment, it seemed as if she might actually submit, might acknowledge the superior power that faced her and accept defeat with whatever dignity remained. Then her own desperation broke through the compulsion like acid eating through silk. "Never!" she snarled, launching herself forward in a final suicidal attack aimed at Ember's exposed throat. If she could not win through skill or strength, she would win through willingness to die taking her enemy with her. But lunar authority had one final lesson to teach. Ember did not dodge or deflect the attack. Instead, she met it head-on with power that made the very air around her shimmer with silver fire. When Elena's claws struck her throat, they simply stopped, as if they had encountered not flesh and bone, but the fundamental forces that governed reality itself. The backlash of thwarted violence sent Elena tumbling across the combat circle, her dark form striking the stone boundary with bone-crushing force. When she tried to rise, her legs buckled beneath her, and blood began to pool beneath her muzzle. Ember approached with regal composure, her silver form blazing with power that made every wolf present understand exactly what they were witnessing. This was not just victory in combat. This was the restoration of lunar authority to its rightful place in werewolf civilization. "I am Luna Kira of the Silver Moon bloodline," she declared, her voice carrying to every corner of the arena and beyond. "I am the daughter of parents who died to protect what their enemies could not understand. I am the mate chosen by destiny for Alpha King Darian Blackthorn, and I will not be denied what is mine by right of blood, power, and the bonds that govern our very souls." Elena tried once more to rise, to continue the fight that had already ended, but lunar compulsion settled over her like a heavy blanket, forcing submission from a will that had finally been broken. "I yield," she whispered, the words barely audible, but carrying clearly in the supernatural silence that had fallen over the arena. The trial by combat was over. The Silver Moon heir had reclaimed her birthright, and everyone present understood that they had witnessed the dawn of a new era in werewolf civilization. But as Kira shifted back to her human form and turned toward where Darian waited in stunned amazement, she realized that winning the right to claim him was only the beginning of the challenges that lay ahead. The sacred grove had been prepared for a ceremony that no living werewolf had ever witnessed. The mating of a lunar queen to an alpha king, conducted according to rituals that predated written history. Ancient torches burned with silver fire that never consumed their fuel, casting light that seemed to come from the moon itself, despite the afternoon sun filtering through the canopy above. Kira stood at the heart of the grove, wearing robes that Elder Sage had woven from moonlight and silver thread, garments that had waited 20 years for their rightful owner to claim them. The fabric moved like liquid starlight against her skin, responding to her lunar authority with subtle shifts of luminescence that marked her as something beyond mortal comprehension. The events following her victory over Elena had unfolded with dreamlike swiftness. House Ravencrest's crimes had been formally exposed before the assembled alphas, their political alliances crumbling as the magnitude of their conspiracy became clear. Elena herself had been exiled from werewolf society forever, stripped of name and status, condemned to wander as a rogue until death claimed her. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was the golden thread of connection that bound her consciousness to Darian's across the grove, a supernatural link that grew stronger with each passing moment as the ancient ceremony prepared to make them one in truth as well as destiny. "The moon bears witness," Elder Sage intoned, her voice carrying the weight of centuries as she began the ritual that would unite two of the most powerful bloodlines in werewolf history. "The forest remembers. The old powers stir to acknowledge what has always been written in the stars." Representatives from every major pack in the Northern Territories had remained to witness this unprecedented event. Where hours earlier they had expected to see a routine political marriage, they now found themselves present for the restoration of lunar royalty to its rightful place in their civilization. Fear and awe warred in their expressions as they watched powers they had thought safely legendary manifesting in living reality. Darian stepped forward from his position at the eastern edge of the ceremonial circle, and Kira felt her breath catch at the sight of him. He wore the traditional black leather and silver mail of Alpha Kings, prepared for sacred bonding, ancient armour that had been worn by his predecessors for 1,000 years. But more than his ceremonial garb, it was the expression in his golden eyes that made her pulse race, reverence, desire, and absolute certainty that they belonged together regardless of the obstacles that had tried to keep them apart. "I come before the old powers," he declared, his voice carrying clearly through the grove as the formal words began. "I come as Darian Blackthorn, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, seeking union with the Luna who was chosen for me by forces beyond mortal understanding." "I answer the call," Kira replied, her own voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were undertaking. "I come as Luna Kira of the Silver Moon bloodline, daughter of murdered royalty, heir to authorities that were hidden but never lost. I come to claim the mate who was destined for me before either of us drew breath." The words were ancient, prescribed by rituals that had governed werewolf mating ceremonies since the dawn of their species. But when Kira spoke them, silver light began to dance around her form, and every wolf present felt the weight of supernatural authority that had returned to claim its due. "Let the bonding begin," Sage commanded. What followed was unlike anything the assembled witnesses had ever seen. This was not the simple exchange of vows that characterize modern mating ceremonies. This was a supernatural joining that involved powers most werewolves had believed were myth. Kira and Darian moved toward each other with ceremonial precision, their steps timed to match the ancient rhythms that governed lunar cycles and tidal flows. As they drew closer, the mate bond that already connected them began to flare with increasing intensity, golden fire that seemed to bridge the space between their souls. "By blood I claim you," Darian said when they stood facing each other in the centre of the circle. He drew a ceremonial blade across his palm, allowing crimson drops to fall onto the sacred stones at their feet. "By blood I accept you," Kira replied, making the same cut and letting her blood mingle with his on the ancient altar. The moment their life essence touched, power exploded outward from the grove with such force that several of the weaker-willed spectators actually lost consciousness. "By wolf I know you," they said in unison, and their human forms began to dissolve as their wolves emerged for the most sacred part of the ceremony. Ember and Fenris faced each other in the silver-lit grove, and the sight of them together was breathtaking. The massive black warwolf and the luminous silver Luna created a study in perfect contrasts: darkness and light, strength and grace, earthbound power and celestial authority united in supernatural harmony. They approached each other slowly, ceremonially, until they stood close enough to touch. When Fenris lowered his great head to nuzzle Ember's silver throat, golden and silver light began to spiral around them both, visible manifestations of the bond that was finally completing itself after being denied for so long. "By spirit I join with you," their voices said, though the words came from their wolf forms in a display of telepathic ability that made several alphas gasp in amazement. This was lunar power at its most profound, not just dominance or compulsion, but the ability to transcend the normal boundaries between human and wolf consciousness. The light around them intensified until it became difficult to look at directly. Power flowed between their joined forms like visible electricity, creating patterns of gold and silver fire that seemed to write themselves across the very air. This was the mate bond, completing itself on every possible level: physical, emotional, spiritual, and supernatural. When the light finally faded, Kira and Darian stood human again, but profoundly changed. The bond between them was no longer a mere connection. It was a fusion of consciousness that allowed each to feel what the other experienced, to know without words what lay in the depths of their mate's heart. "It is done," Elder Sage announced, her ancient voice heavy with satisfaction. "The Lunar Queen has claimed her rightful mate, and the Alpha King has accepted the bond that destiny wove for him. Let all present witness that the Silver Moon bloodline has returned to its throne, and the old powers walk among us once more." Cheers erupted from the assembled wolves, though whether they celebrated from genuine joy or political necessity was unclear. What mattered was that none could deny what they had witnessed: the restoration of lunar authority, the completion of a supernatural bond, and the dawning of a new era in werewolf civilization. As the formal ceremony concluded and the witnesses began to disperse, Kira found herself alone with Darian for the first time since the mate bond had formed. The intensity of their connection, no longer filtered through ceremony or political obstacles, threatened to overwhelm her completely. My Luna, he said softly, the title carrying a weight of reverence that made her heart race. My queen, my mate. My Alpha, she replied, reaching out to touch his face with hands that still glowed faintly with residual power. My king, my destiny. Through the completed bond, she could feel everything he felt, his awe at her strength, his desire for the future they would build together, his absolute certainty that no force in existence could separate them again. But she could also feel deeper emotions that words could never adequately express. The profound relief of a man who had found his perfect match, the fierce protectiveness of a mate who would destroy anyone who threatened her, and underneath it all, a love so complete that it seemed to redefine the very concept. What happens now, she asked, though part of her already knew the answer through their supernatural connection. Now, Darian said, silver and gold fire dancing around them both as their powers merged and amplified each other. We rule together, as we were always meant to. We protect our people, we defend our territories, and we ensure that no one ever again attempts to murder lunar royalty in the name of political convenience. The promise carried the weight of absolute authority, backed by powers that had just been proven beyond any doubt. House Ravencrest had fallen, their conspiracy exposed, and their crimes punished. The established order that had tried to suppress lunar authority for 20 years lay in ruins. In its place stood something far more dangerous to those who would threaten the innocent, a mated pair of supernatural rulers whose combined power dwarfed anything werewolf civilization had seen in living memory. Together, Kira said, the word carrying the force of a sacred vow. Forever, Darian agreed, and their kiss sealed a bond that would reshape the northern territories and restore the ancient balance between strength and wisdom, between power and compassion. The silver moon had risen again, and its light would guide werewolf civilization into a new age of justice and protection for all who claimed no other defence than their Lunar Queen's mercy. 6 months had passed since the silver moon Luna reclaimed her throne, and the northern territories had never known such prosperity. The palace that had once felt cold and political now hummed with the warm energy of rulers who genuinely cared for their people's well-being. Where fear and rigid hierarchy had once governed pack interactions, a new system based on merit and compassion had taken root. Kira stood on the royal balcony overlooking the capital city, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly where their first child grew strong and healthy. The pregnancy had been announced just 3 weeks earlier, sending waves of celebration throughout the territories as people rejoiced in the promise of a new generation born from the union of Alpha King and Lunar Queen. The delegates from the eastern reaches have arrived, Darian said, approaching from behind to wrap his arms around her waist. Even after months of marriage, the mate bond still flared with golden warmth whenever he touched her, a constant reminder of the supernatural connection that bound them soul to soul. "Let them wait," she replied, leaning back against his chest with a contentment she had never imagined possible. "I'm watching the children play in the courtyard below." It was true, the palace grounds now echoed with laughter where once they had known only formal ceremony. Young wolves from across the territories came to train under the Lunar Queen's personal guidance, learning that strength came not from dominating others, but from protecting those who could not protect themselves. 3 other Silver Moon survivors had been found and brought home during the past months, distant cousins who had lived in hiding, believing themselves the last of their bloodline. Their reunion with their Luna had been emotional beyond words, and their combined power had made the royal court a beacon of hope for werewolves who had spent decades believing that justice was nothing more than a comfortable lie. "Maria's daughter shifted for the first time yesterday," Kira said, referring to one of the kitchen staff whose loyalty had never wavered, even when she was nothing more than a servant. A beautiful golden wolf, strong and confident, nothing like the broken creatures we used to produce when fear governed our every action. "You've given them something to believe in, Darian murmured, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "You've shown them that worth isn't determined by bloodline or political connections, but by the choices we make and the courage we show." It was true. The rigid pack hierarchy that had once crushed spirits and stifled potential had been replaced by a system that recognized individual merit over inherited status. Former servants now served as advisors when their wisdom proved valuable. Warriors were judged by their dedication to protecting others rather than their ability to dominate inferiors. The change had not been without resistance, but lunar authority backed by genuine compassion had proven impossible to argue against. "The pregnancy suits you," Darian said, his hand joining hers on her belly. Through the mate bond, they could both feel their child's presence, strong, healthy, and already showing signs of the dual heritage that would make them one of the most powerful werewolves ever born. "She will grow up knowing she is loved," Kira said, unconsciously echoing words she had spoken on the night when everything changed. "She will know she belongs, that she has value beyond what others might assign to her. She will never spend 20 years believing herself broken." "She?" Darian asked with amusement. "A mother knows," Kira replied, with the serene confidence of someone whose intuition had been proven repeatedly accurate since her lunar abilities fully awakened. "She will be strong like her father and wise like her mother, but most importantly, she will be free to become whatever she chooses to be." A comfortable silence fell between them as they watched the sun set over their domain. The territories that had once been fragmented by political rivalries and ancient grudges now worked together with an efficiency that surprised even their rulers. Trade flowed freely between former enemies, young wolves from different packs trained together without prejudice, and justice was dispensed with wisdom rather than favoritism. "Do you ever miss it?" Darian asked quietly. "The simplicity of believing yourself ordinary?" Kira considered the question seriously, as she considered all things that mattered to the people she now served. Did she miss the days when her greatest concern was avoiding Beta Marcus's contempt? Did she long for the time when her problems were small and her responsibilities limited to kitchen duties and staying invisible? "No," she said finally. "I miss the ignorance sometimes. There was a certain peace in not knowing how much suffering existed in our territories, how many injustices went uncorrected because no one with power cared enough to act. But I don't miss feeling worthless. I don't miss believing I was broken. I don't miss the loneliness of thinking I would never belong anywhere." She turned in his arms to face him, silver eyes meeting gold in the fading light. "And I could never miss the life I had before I knew what it felt like to be loved completely, to be understood without explanation, to be valued not despite my differences, but because of them." "My Luna," he said softly, the title still carrying the weight of reverence and wonder that it had held since the night she first claimed it. "My queen, my heart." "My Alpha," she replied, reaching up to touch his face with hands that still glowed faintly with lunar power whenever strong emotions moved her. "My king, my soul." The mate bond pulsed between them with warmth that had only deepened with time and shared responsibility. They had faced threats together in the months following their mating, ambitious alphas who thought a newly crowned Luna might be vulnerable, rogue packs that refused to accept the new order, political challenges from territories that preferred the old system of oppression and rigid hierarchy. All had learned the same lesson that House Ravencrest had discovered too late. The Lunar Queen's mercy was infinite for those who deserved it, but her justice was swift and absolute for those who threatened the innocent. "The delegates can wait until tomorrow," Darian said, pulling her closer as full darkness settled over the palace. "Tonight is for us, for our child, for the future we're building together." "Together," Kira agreed, the word carrying all the weight of promises kept and dreams fulfilled. As they stood on the balcony overlooking the kingdom, they ruled with wisdom and strength. Kira reflected on the impossible journey that had brought her from the servants' quarters to the throne. She had been told she was nobody, nothing, a broken wolf who would never amount to anything significant. But the truth, as it always did, had found its way to the surface. She was Luna Kira, of the Silver Moon bloodline, daughter of murdered royalty, queen of the Northern Territories, and mate to the most powerful alpha in werewolf civilization. More importantly, she was exactly who she had always been meant to be, not despite the years of believing herself worthless, but because of them. Sometimes the greatest power came from remembering that you had never truly been powerless at all. You had simply been waiting for the right moment to shine. The silver moon rose full and bright above the palace, casting its light over territories where justice reigned and love conquered all obstacles. And in the royal chambers, 2 hearts beat as one, while a third grew strong beneath the Lunar Queen's protective hand, proof that some bonds were truly unbreakable. The servant girl was gone forever, but the queen she had become would rule with wisdom learned in the shadows and strength forged in the fire of absolute truth. She had never needed to bow to anyone, because she had been born to lift others up. "Child, come with me." Elder Sage's voice cut through the morning bustle of the pack house like a blade through silk. Kira looked up from the breakfast dishes she had been scrubbing, her hands still dripping with soapy water. The ancient woman stood in the kitchen doorway, her silver hair braided with ceremonial beads that marked her as the pack's keeper of old knowledge. Kira had always been fascinated by Elder Sage, though she had never dared approach the revered woman directly. At 93 years old, Sage was the oldest living member of their pack, a repository of stories and wisdom that stretched back to the early days of werewolf civilization. Her wolf had been silver white in her youth, they said, before age had stolen her ability to shift. "Go," Martha whispered, giving Kira a gentle push toward the doorway. "When Elder Sage calls, you answer, no matter who you are." Kira dried her hands quickly and followed the elder woman out of the kitchens, through the main hall where pack members were already gathering for the day's preparations, and into the morning sunshine beyond. Sage moved with surprising grace for her age, her walking stick more ceremonial than necessary as she led the way toward the sacred grove that bordered the packlands. "Elder Sage," Kira began tentatively, "if this is about yesterday's training incident, I want you to know that I've been trying to—" "Hush, child." Sage's voice was not unkind, but it carried an authority that made Kira's words die in her throat. "This has nothing to do with Marcus and his small-minded understanding of pack dynamics. Walk with me and listen carefully to what I have to say." They entered the grove, where the oldest oak trees cast dappled shadows across a carpet of fallen leaves. This was sacred ground, where the pack's most important ceremonies were held, where the ancient laws were recited during the full moon gatherings. Kira had never been invited here before, except during mandatory pack events, and she felt the weight of the place pressing against her consciousness. "Tell me about your wolf," Sage said, settling herself on a fallen log with the ease of someone who had made this journey countless times. "Tell me about Ember." Kira blinked in surprise. She had never told anyone her wolf's name, had never spoken of the silver she-wolf as anything other than "my wolf" in the rare moments when she was required to discuss her shifting abilities at all. How did Elder Sage know? "I don't understand," she said carefully. "Your wolf has a name, does she not? A name you have never spoken aloud, but that echoes in your mind when she stirs to consciousness. Ember, like the glowing coals that remain when a great fire has burned down to its essence." The accuracy of the description made Kira's breath catch. Yes, that was exactly how Ember felt within her mind. Not like a dying flame, but like the concentrated heart of a fire that had burned so intensely it had distilled itself into pure, unquenchable heat. "How do you know that?" Kira whispered. Sage's ancient eyes studied her with an intensity that made Kira feel as if every secret she had ever kept was being laid bare. Because I have been watching you for 20 years, child, watching and waiting for the signs that would tell me whether my suspicions were correct." "Suspicions about what?" Instead of answering directly, Sage reached into the leather pouch at her waist and withdrew something wrapped in soft cloth. She unfolded the fabric carefully, revealing a small wooden carving of a wolf. But this was not like any wolf Kira had ever seen depicted in pack art. This wolf's head was crowned with a crescent moon, and silver paint highlighted its fur, despite the carving's obvious age. "Do you know what this represents?" Sage asked. Kira shook her head, though something about the carving made Ember stir restlessly within her mind. "This is the symbol of the Silver Moon bloodline," Sage said quietly. "A lineage that was thought to have been extinguished 30 years ago when the last known heir was murdered along with her mate and child." The word murdered hit Kira like a physical blow. She had always been told that her parents died in a hunting accident when she was barely 2 years old, that she had been found wandering the forest by pack scouts and taken in out of mercy. The idea that they might have been killed deliberately had never occurred to her. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, though part of her already dreaded the answer. Sage set the carving aside and leaned forward, her gnarled hands reaching out to push aside the neckline of Kira's worn tunic. "Because of this," she said, her finger tracing a mark on Kira's shoulder blade that had always been there, as much a part of her as her grey eyes or dark hair. Kira twisted to look down at her own shoulder, seeing the mark as if for the first time. It was crescent-shaped, no bigger than her thumb, a patch of skin that was slightly paler than the rest. She had always assumed it was just a birthmark, meaningless and unremarkable like everything else about her appearance. "The mark of the silver moon," Sage breathed. "Every child born to that bloodline carries it. I should have recognised it sooner, but the suppression spell hid so much of what you truly are." "Suppression spell?" Kira's voice came out as barely a whisper. Within her mind, Ember was becoming increasingly agitated, pacing like a caged animal, as if these words were awakening something that had been sleeping. "A powerful binding placed on you as an infant to hide your true nature," Sage explained. "It was meant to protect you, to keep you alive by ensuring that no one would recognise what you were. But such magic comes with a cost. It has not only hidden your abilities from others, it has hidden them from yourself." Kira stared at the elder woman in disbelief. "That's impossible. I'm nobody. I'm nothing. I'm just a broken wolf who can't even submit properly to pack authority." "Cannot submit?" Sage laughed, but there was no humour in the sound. "Child, you cannot submit because it is not in your nature to bow to others. The Silver Moon bloodline carries the original lunar power, the authority that predates all pack hierarchies. Your wolf does not bow because she recognises no authority higher than her own." The words seemed to echo in the grove, hanging in the air like a challenge to everything Kira had been taught about herself. Lunar power, original authority. It sounded like something from the old stories, the legends that were recited during ceremonial gatherings, but never spoken of as historical fact. "That can't be true," she said desperately. "If what you're saying were real, then I would be—" "Powerful beyond measure," Sage finished. "Yes, child. You would be the most dominant wolf born in 3 centuries. You would be a queen among our kind, with abilities that would make every alpha in the territory bow to your authority." As if summoned by those words, Ember suddenly surged to the surface of Kira's consciousness. The silver wolf's presence flooded through her human form, and for one startling moment, Kira felt what it would be like to possess that kind of power. Her senses sharpened until she could hear the heartbeat of every small creature in the grove. Her muscles coiled with strength that felt limitless. Her very presence seemed to expand, claiming the space around her as rightfully hers. And then, just as suddenly, the sensation was gone, leaving her gasping and shaken. "What was that?" she breathed. "A glimpse of your true self," Sage said, and there was something like pride in her ancient voice. The suppression spell is weakening. It was always meant to fade as you reach maturity, but something has been catalyzing the process. Something that has made your wolf restless, made your abilities strain against their bindings. Kira thought of the strange dreams she had been having lately, dreams where she ran through moonlit forests with a freedom she had never known in waking life, dreams where her howl could summon storms, where her very presence commanded the respect of creatures that had never bowed to anyone. "What happens when the spell breaks completely?" she asked. Sage's expression grew grave. "That depends on whether those who killed your parents realize that you survived. The Silver Moon bloodline was eliminated because their power threatened the established order. If certain families discover that the bloodline lives on in you." She did not need to finish the sentence. Kira understood the implication. She would be killed, just as her parents had been, to prevent her from claiming the authority that was her birthright. "Why are you telling me this now?" Kira asked. "Why today, with the Lunar Games about to begin?" "Because dangerous times are ahead," Sage replied. "Because you need to understand what is happening to you before others notice the changes. And because there are old words, ancient phrases that your wolf remembers even if your human mind does not. Listen." Sage began to speak in a language that Kira had never heard before, syllables that felt both foreign and familiar. The words seemed to resonate in her bones, and within her mind, Ember threw back her silver head and howled in recognition. The sound that came from Kira's human throat was not quite a howl, but it carried across the grove with such power that birds took flight from the surrounding trees. The ancient words triggered something deep within her consciousness, a stirring of memories that did not belong to her, but to her bloodline, her ancestors, the proud line of Silver Moon Lunas who had ruled with wisdom and strength for countless generations. "Remember, child," Sage whispered as the echoes faded. "Remember who you truly are, because the time of hiding is almost over. In 3 days, when you stand before the gathered packs during the Lunar Games, your true nature may reveal itself, whether you will it or not." Kira stared at the old woman in terror. "What am I supposed to do with this knowledge? How am I supposed to face the trials knowing that I'm living a lie?" "You face them with courage," Sage said simply. "You remember that your parents died to protect you, and you honor their sacrifice by surviving, and you trust that the Moon Goddess has a plan, even when that plan is hidden from mortal understanding." As they walked back toward the pack house, Kira felt as if the entire world had shifted around her. Every assumption she had made about herself, every belief she had held about her place in the pack hierarchy, had been shattered by Sage's revelations. She was not broken. She was not worthless. She was the heir to a power that had been deliberately hidden, deliberately suppressed, deliberately forgotten. But with that knowledge came a terror that threatened to overwhelm her. If Sage was right, if she truly carried the Silver Moon bloodline, then the Lunar Games would not just be a humiliating display of her supposed inadequacy. They would be a potential death sentence, a public stage where her emerging power might reveal itself to exactly the wrong people. That night, as she lay in her narrow bed in the servants' quarters, Kira found sleep impossible. Within her mind, Ember paced restlessly, more active than she had been in years. The silver wolf seemed to be testing the boundaries of whatever had kept her suppressed, pushing against invisible barriers that grew weaker with each passing hour. And in her dreams, when exhaustion finally claimed her, Kira saw herself standing in moonlight with silver fire coursing through her veins. She saw herself as she was meant to be, proud, powerful, unbroken. She saw herself as a queen. The news arrived with the dawn patrol, carried by a scout whose wolf was still panting from the hard run through the mountain passes. Alpha King Darian Blackthorn was coming to Moonhaven Pack, not sending an emissary, not delegating the oversight to a subordinate, but coming himself to witness the Lunar Games. Kira watched the chaos unfold from her position in the stables, where she had been assigned the task of mucking out the stalls to keep her well away from the frantic preparations. Pack members rushed through the courtyard with armloads of ceremonial banners, fresh rushes for the floors, and provisions for a feast worthy of the most powerful alpha in the Northern Territories. Why would he come here? She heard Beta Marcus asking pack leader Harrison as they strode past her hiding spot. Moonhaven has never warranted personal attention from the throne. We're too small, too remote. Perhaps that's exactly why, Harrison replied, his voice tight with nervousness. He's been making surprise visits to outlying packs for months now. Some say he's looking for something, or someone. The implications of those words sent a chill down Kira's spine. After yesterday's revelations from Elder Sage, the idea of the most powerful werewolf in the territories arriving to search for something felt far too coincidental for comfort. Within her mind, Ember stirred restlessly, the silver wolf's agitation growing stronger with each passing hour. "When does he arrive?" Marcus asked. "Tomorrow morning, which gives us less than 24 hours to make this pack look worthy of royal attention. Get everyone moving. I want every surface scrubbed, every banner hung, every garden tended, and for the moon goddess's sake, keep the defective wolves out of sight until the games officially begin." Kira didn't need to guess who Harrison meant by defective wolves. She sank deeper into the shadows of the stable, hoping to remain invisible until the royal entourage passed through and departed. The last thing she needed was to draw the attention of an Alpha King who might possess the knowledge to recognize what Elder Sage claimed she truly was. But invisibility, it seemed, was no longer an option for her. The Alpha King arrived with the morning mist, his procession emerging from the forest like something out of the old legends. Kira had positioned herself in the hayloft of the stables, reasoning that she could observe the arrival without risking detection. What she saw from her perch stole the breath from her lungs. Darian Blackthorn rode at the head of a column of elite guards, his massive black destrier moving with the controlled power of a barely leashed storm. But it was not the man that captured her attention. It was the wolf that paced alongside his mount. The creature was enormous, easily twice the size of any wolf she had ever seen. Its fur was so black it seemed to absorb the morning light, and its eyes burned with an intelligence that felt almost human. This had to be Fenris, the Alpha King's legendary warwolf, the beast that was said to have never been defeated in combat, never been dominated by another wolf, never been anything less than absolutely loyal to his human counterpart. As the procession entered the main courtyard, Kira found herself leaning forward despite every instinct that screamed at her to hide. There was something about the scene unfolding below that felt significant, though she could not name what drew her attention so completely. Alpha King Darian dismounted with fluid grace, and Kira got her first clear look at the man who ruled the Northern Territories with absolute authority. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that caught the morning light and revealed traces of silver at the temples. His face was angular and stern, marked by a scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw, a reminder of battles fought and survived. But it was his eyes that made Kira's breath catch in her throat. They were the same golden amber as his wolf's, and they held a restless intensity that spoke of barely contained power. This was not a man who had been born to rule through political manoeuvring or inherited privilege. This was a predator who had claimed his position through strength and held it through absolute dominance. Pack leader Harrison rushed forward to offer the traditional greeting, but Darian's attention seemed to be focused elsewhere. His gaze swept the assembled pack members with systematic precision, as if he were cataloguing each face, each scent, each subtle indication of status and capability. "Your Majesty," Harrison said, dropping to one knee in formal submission, "Moonhaven Pack is honoured by your presence. We have prepared accommodations worthy of—" "Rise," Darian said, his voice carrying easily across the courtyard, despite its conversational volume. "I did not come here for ceremony, Harrison. I came to witness your lunar games and assess the quality of your young wolves." There was something in his tone that suggested his visit had a purpose beyond simple evaluation. As he spoke, his massive wolf companion prowled through the assembled pack members, seeming to test their scents with methodical interest. Several of the younger wolves instinctively backed away from the legendary beast, their own wolves recognizing a predator far beyond their ability to challenge. And then, impossibly, Fenris stopped moving. The great black wolf went perfectly still in the centre of the courtyard, his massive head turning slowly toward the stables where Kira lay hidden in the shadows of the hayloft. Their eyes met across the distance, and Kira felt something shift in the very air around her. The black wolf's amber gaze locked onto hers with an intensity that made her feel as if he could see straight through the wooden walls and dusty shadows to the truth of what she was. Within her mind, Ember suddenly surged to awareness, her silver consciousness pressing against the barriers of Kira's human form with unprecedented urgency. For a moment that stretched like eternity, neither wolf looked away. Kira found herself unable to breathe, unable to think, unable to do anything but stare into those ancient amber eyes and feel something fundamental change in the fabric of her reality. Then Fenris threw back his massive head and howled. The sound was unlike anything Kira had ever heard. It was not the territorial call of a dominant male or the hunting cry of a predator. It was a sound of recognition, of greeting, of something so profound that every other wolf in the courtyard fell silent in response. Alpha King Darien spun toward his companion, his own expression shifting from mild interest to sharp attention. "Fenris," he said quietly, but his voice carried in the sudden hush. "What is it?" The black wolf padded toward the stables with purposeful strides, his gaze never wavering from Kira's hiding spot. She wanted to flee, to disappear deeper into the shadows, but she found herself frozen by the intensity of his focus. It was as if he had pinpointed her exact location and was drawing everyone's attention to her presence through the sheer force of his will. "There's something in the stables," Beta Marcus said, his hand moving instinctively to the blade at his side. "Shall I investigate, Your Majesty?" But Darien held up a hand for silence, his own attention now focused on the building where Kira cowered. She watched in growing terror as his golden eyes began to glow with the same inner fire she had seen in his wolf. This was a man who missed nothing, who could track the faintest scent or the smallest movement with predatory precision. "No," he said slowly, "leave it. Whatever Fenris sensed, it will reveal itself in due time." The dismissal should have been a relief, but something in his tone suggested that he was not truly letting the matter go. He had simply chosen to wait rather than force a confrontation in this moment. The implication was clear. He knew something was hiding in the stables, and he would uncover it when the time was right. As the royal party moved toward the pack house to inspect their accommodations, Kira remained motionless in the hayloft until long after the courtyard had emptied. Only when she was certain that everyone had departed did she finally allow herself to breathe normally again. But the damage was done. Alpha King Darien Blackthorn had arrived at Moonhaven Pack, and his legendary wolf had somehow detected her presence, despite her attempts at concealment. The coincidence felt far too convenient to be natural, especially in light of Elder Sage's warnings about the dangerous times ahead. Within her mind, Ember paced with increasing agitation, her silver consciousness pressing against the boundaries of the suppression spell with almost violent intensity. The wolf seemed to recognize something about the Alpha King and his companion, something that Kira's human awareness could not quite grasp, but that filled her with a mixture of terror and inexplicable anticipation. That evening, as the pack gathered for the welcoming feast, Kira remained in the kitchens where she belonged. She served course after course of elaborately prepared dishes, keeping her eyes downcast and her movements as unobtrusive as possible. But she could feel a new weight in the air, a sense of scrutiny that seemed to follow her even when she was certain no one was looking in her direction. It was only when she was returning to the servants' quarters, after the final dishes had been cleared, that she encountered Alpha King Darien directly for the first time. He was standing in the shadowed corridor that led to her room, his imposing figure backlit by the torches that lined the main hallway. She froze the moment she saw him, every instinct screaming at her to flee, even as her rational mind recognized that escape was impossible. "You were in the stables this morning," he said quietly. It was not a question. Kira swallowed hard, forcing herself to meet his piercing gaze. "Yes, Your Majesty, I was assigned to stable duty." He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "What's your name?" "Kira, Your Majesty." "And your wolf?" The question caught her off guard. In all her years in the pack, no one had ever asked about her wolf as a separate entity. Most of the pack members acted as if Ember's existence was barely worth acknowledging, given her inability to submit properly to authority. "I call her Ember," she said carefully. Something flickered in Darien's golden eyes at the name. "Ember," he repeated, as if testing the word. "Fitting. There's something about your wolf, Kira. Something that called to mine across a crowded courtyard, despite every attempt at concealment." Kira's heart hammered against her ribs. This was exactly what Elder Sage had warned her about. Being noticed by the wrong people, having her emerging power recognized by those who might see her as a threat. "I don't understand, Your Majesty," she said, though part of her feared that she understood all too well. "Neither do I," he admitted, and there was something almost vulnerable in his admission. "But I intend to find out. Tomorrow, when the Lunar Games begin, I want to see your wolf perform. I want to understand what makes her different from the others." He turned to leave, then paused and looked back at her over his shoulder. "One more thing, Kira. That hiding place in the hayloft. Find a better one. You're far too interesting to remain invisible much longer." As his footsteps faded down the corridor, Kira sank against the stone wall and tried to steady her breathing. The Alpha King had not only noticed her, he had specifically sought her out to warn her that her attempts at concealment were failing. Within her mind, Ember threw back her silver head and howled in response to some call that Kira's human consciousness could not perceive. But she felt the truth of it in her bones, in the growing heat that seemed to flow through her veins whenever she thought of those piercing golden eyes. Something was coming, something that would change everything, and no matter how desperately she wanted to remain hidden, invisible, safe in her insignificance, Kira could feel that her time of hiding was finally, inevitably, coming to an end. The morning of the Lunar Games dawned cold and grey, with mist clinging to the forest canopy like the breath of sleeping giants. Kira had barely slept, her mind churning with Elder Sage's revelations and the memory of Alpha King Darien's piercing golden eyes. She had hoped to slip away before the trials began, to disappear into the woods and avoid the public humiliation that awaited her in the arena. But Beta Marcus had anticipated her cowardice. "Going somewhere?" His voice cut through the pre-dawn silence as she crept toward the servants' entrance with a small pack containing her few possessions. He stood blocking her path, flanked by two younger pack members whose expressions made it clear they would not hesitate to use force if necessary. "I was just—" Kira began, but Marcus held up a hand to silence her. "You were just abandoning your pack on the most important day in 3 years," he said coldly. "Did you think we wouldn't notice? Did you think you could simply vanish and leave us to explain to the Alpha King why one of our wolves failed to participate in the sacred trials?" Kira's stomach twisted with dread. She had hoped her absence would go unnoticed among the dozens of young wolves preparing to compete. The idea that her participation was specifically expected, specifically required, filled her with a terror that threatened to overwhelm her completely. "Please," she whispered, "you know what will happen when my wolf refuses to submit. The humiliation will reflect poorly on the entire pack. Surely it would be better if you hid like the coward you've always been?" Marcus's lips curled with disgust. No, Kira. Today you face the consequences of 20 years of defiance. Today you learn what happens when a broken wolf tries to pretend she belongs among her betters. The guards flanked her as Marcus led the way toward the main hall where the other competitors were already gathering. Kira could hear the excited chatter of young wolves preparing for their moment of glory, the nervous laughter of those who hoped to catch the eye of an advantageous mate, the confident boasting of those who expected to dominate the trials. She did not belong among them. She had never belonged anywhere. The arena had been constructed in the wide clearing at the heart of pack territory, a circular space surrounded by raised wooden seats that could accommodate several hundred spectators. Visiting wolves from allied packs filled the stands, their colourful banners and ceremonial dress creating a festival atmosphere that made Kira's plain brown tunic feel like a declaration of her unworthiness. At the highest point of the seating area, a pavilion had been erected for distinguished guests. Alpha King Darien sat at its centre, his imposing figure commanding attention even from a distance. His war-wolf Fenris lay at his feet, the massive black creature's amber eyes scanning the assembled competitors with predatory interest. "Welcome, honoured guests and proud pack members," pack leader Harrison's voice boomed across the arena. "Today we celebrate the strength, skill and loyalty of Moonhaven's finest young wolves. Let the Lunar Games begin." The first trial was designed to demonstrate pack unity through submission to authority. One by one, the unmated wolves were called forward to stand before the assembled betas and display their ability to respond to alpha commands. It was the most fundamental test of pack membership, the basic requirement that separated civilized werewolves from rogue animals. Kira watched from the competitors' area as wolf after wolf performed the ritual flawlessly. They approached the centre of the arena with heads respectfully lowered, shifted into their wolf forms on command, and demonstrated perfect submission when ordered to bow. The crowd murmured approvingly at each successful display, and several of the more impressive performers earned nods of acknowledgement from the visiting dignitaries. "Next," Harrison called, consulting his list with obvious reluctance. Kira of no surname bonded with the she-wolf Ember. The arena fell silent. Even the visiting wolves who had never heard of Moonhaven's resident outcast seemed to sense the shift in atmosphere. Kira felt hundreds of pairs of eyes turn toward her as she rose unsteadily from her place among the competitors. Her legs trembled as she walked toward the centre of the arena. The distance seemed impossibly vast, each step taking her farther from the relative safety of anonymity, and closer to the moment when her wolf's defiance would be exposed before the most powerful werewolves in the Northern Territories. "Shift," Beta Marcus commanded when she reached the designated position. His voice carried the full weight of his alpha authority, reinforced by his intention to make her failure as public and humiliating as possible. Kira closed her eyes and reached for the familiar sensation of her wolf stirring to consciousness. But instead of the reluctant emergence she expected, Ember surged forward with unprecedented eagerness. The silver wolf seemed excited by the presence of so many spectators, energized rather than intimidated by the attention focused upon them. The transformation rippled through Kira's body like liquid fire. Her human form dissolved and reformed as silver fur sprouted across her skin, and her bones restructured themselves with fluid grace. When the shift completed, she stood in the centre of the arena as Ember, her silver-grey coat gleaming despite the overcast sky, and her golden eyes burning with an inner light that had never been so pronounced before. A collective intake of breath swept through the crowd. Even Kira could sense that something was different about her wolf's appearance today. Ember seemed larger somehow, more solid, as if the suppression spell that Elder Sage had described was continuing to weaken with each passing hour. "Bow to your beta," Marcus commanded, his voice carrying across the arena for all to hear. Ember stood perfectly still. her golden eyes fixed on Marcus with an expression that bordered on curiosity, as if she were observing some strange ritual performed by a lesser species. There was no aggression in her posture, no challenge or defiance, simply complete, absolute indifference to his authority. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Pack members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, visiting dignitaries leaned forward with interest, and Marcus's face began to darken with humiliated rage. "I said bow," he snarled, pouring every ounce of his alpha power into the command. Ember tilted her head slightly, the gesture so purely puzzled that it would have been comical under other circumstances. She seemed genuinely confused by his expectation that she should lower herself before him. To her, apparently, the very concept was incomprehensible. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd. Some spectators seemed disturbed by this unprecedented display of defiance, while others appeared fascinated by a wolf who could simply ignore alpha commands as if they were meaningless suggestions. "Perhaps," came a voice from the royal pavilion, "you should try a different approach." Every head in the arena turned toward Alpha King Darian as he rose from his seat. Even from a distance, his presence seemed to fill the space with barely contained power. This was not merely an alpha. This was the Alpha King, the most dominant werewolf in the known world, a man whose authority was absolute and unquestioned. "Your Majesty?" Harrison asked nervously. "The wolf clearly responds to different stimuli than your average pack member," Darian said, his voice carrying easily across the arena despite its conversational volume. "Perhaps she requires a more significant display of dominance." He stepped down from the pavilion and walked toward the arena floor with fluid, predatory grace. His werewolf Fenris rose to follow, the massive black creature moving with deadly purpose. As they approached the competitors' circle, Kira felt something shift in the very air around them. This was power, real power, not the borrowed authority of a beta-enforcing pack hierarchy, but the natural dominance of a creature born to rule through strength rather than politics. Darian entered the arena and approached until he stood only a few yards from where Ember waited. Up close, his golden eyes seemed to glow with their own inner fire, and the scent of ancient forests and winter storms clung to his skin like a living thing. "Shift back," he said quietly, speaking directly to Kira rather than issuing a general command. The words hit her consciousness like a physical blow. This was not a request or a suggestion. It was a directive delivered with such absolute authority that her wolf form began to dissolve before she consciously decided to obey. Within moments, she stood before the Alpha King in her human form, acutely aware of how small and vulnerable she appeared next to his imposing figure. "Now," he said, his voice still quiet but carrying clearly across the silent arena, "show me what makes your wolf different from all the others." "I don't understand," Kira whispered, though part of her feared that she understood all too well. "Shift again," he commanded, "but this time don't try to make her submit. Let her be exactly what she is." The suggestion was so alien to everything she had been taught about proper pack behaviour that Kira hesitated. For 20 years she had been trying to force Ember to bend to others' expectations, to suppress the silver wolf's natural instincts in favour of socially acceptable submission. But Alpha King Darian was asking her to do the opposite. He was asking her to let Ember be herself. Kira closed her eyes and reached for her wolf consciousness, but this time she made no attempt to guide or control the transformation. She simply opened herself to whatever Ember wanted to be and let the silver wolf take control completely. The shift that followed was unlike anything she had ever experienced. Power flowed through her like molten metal, transforming her body with an intensity that bordered on ecstasy. When the transformation completed, she stood in the arena as Ember unleashed for the first time in her adult life. The silver wolf was magnificent. Her coat seemed to shimmer with its own inner light, and her golden eyes burned with an ancient fire that spoke of bloodlines stretching back to the dawn of werewolf civilization. She stood with her head held high, her posture radiating confidence and authority in a way that made every other wolf in the arena instinctively recognize her as something extraordinary. And then Alpha King Darian did something that sent shockwaves through every spectator present. He shifted into his own wolf form and approached Ember with respectful, deliberate steps. Fenris was everything the legends claimed: massive, powerful, absolutely dominant. His black fur seemed to absorb light, and his amber eyes held the wisdom of countless battles won. He was the Alpha King's war-wolf, the creature that had never been defeated, never been challenged successfully, never shown deference to any other being. But as he approached Ember, something impossible happened. The great black wolf slowed his steps until he was moving with ceremonial precision. His massive head began to lower gradually, incrementally, until he was looking up at the silver she-wolf with something that could only be described as reverence. And then, in front of hundreds of witnesses, Fenris lowered his head completely and held the position of submission. The Alpha King's legendary war-wolf was bowing to Kira's supposedly broken she-wolf. The arena erupted into chaos. Gasps of disbelief, cries of shock, and excited chatter filled the air as spectators tried to process what they had just witnessed. This was impossible. This violated every law of pack hierarchy, every understanding of dominance and submission that formed the foundation of werewolf society. But Ember simply stood there with regal composure, accepting Fenris's submission as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Her golden eyes met those of every spectator who dared to look directly at her, and in them Kira glimpsed a truth that Elder Sage's revelations had only hinted at. This was not a broken wolf learning to submit. This was a queen finally beginning to remember her throne. The second trial began an hour after the submission demonstration, but the arena still buzzed with whispered conversations about what everyone had witnessed. Kira sat among the remaining competitors, acutely aware of the stares and murmurs that followed her every movement. Some wolves looked at her with newfound respect, others with suspicion, and a few with outright fear. She tried to process what had happened when Ember faced Fenris in the arena. The memory felt surreal, like something that had occurred to someone else entirely. Her wolf's regal bearing, the silver light that had seemed to emanate from her very fur, the way the Alpha King's legendary war-wolf had bowed, as if recognizing royalty. None of it aligned with 20 years of being treated as the pack's most worthless member. "Combat trials next," announced Beta Marcus, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. The humiliation of watching his authority completely ignored in front of the Alpha King had left him looking for someone to blame, and his eyes kept finding Kira with predatory focus. The combat phase would pair wolves in sparring matches designed to demonstrate their fighting skills and tactical thinking. It was meant to showcase the pack's warrior potential to visiting dignitaries, and traditionally it was where the strongest wolves began to distinguish themselves from their peers. "Kira?" Marcus's voice cut across the competitors' area like a blade. "You're up first." Of course she was. After the unprecedented scene with Fenris, Marcus clearly wanted to restore the natural order by having her thoroughly defeated in combat. It would remind everyone that supernatural recognition meant nothing if it wasn't backed by genuine fighting ability. "Your opponent," Marcus continued with obvious satisfaction, "will be Lydia Silverpaw." A collective intake of breath swept through the spectators. Lydia was Beta Marcus's daughter, the pack's most accomplished young fighter, and the presumed future mate of whoever proved most worthy during the trials. She was everything Kira was not: beautiful, powerful, respected, and absolutely lethal in combat. More importantly, she was furious. Kira could see it in the way Lydia's green eyes burned with resentment as they were called to the centre of the arena. The Beta's daughter had expected this to be her moment of triumph, her opportunity to shine before the visiting dignitaries and catch the eye of an advantageous mate. Instead, she was being forced to waste her time defeating the pack's charity case, while everyone still whispered about the inexplicable scene with the Alpha King's wolf. "This should be educational," Lydia said quietly as they took their positions in the combat circle. 20 years of coddling ends here, kitchen girl. I'm going to show everyone exactly what you're worth." The words should have terrified Kira, and part of her was indeed afraid. Lydia had been training in combat since childhood, while Kira's only fighting experience came from dodging bullies and avoiding confrontation. In any rational assessment, this match would be over within minutes, but within her mind, Ember stirred with something that felt suspiciously like anticipation. "Combat begins when I signal," Marcus announced to the crowd. "The match continues until one wolf submits or is rendered unable to continue. Standard pack law applies. No killing blows, no permanent maiming." He raised his hand, and Kira felt the familiar sensation of her wolf consciousness rising to the surface. But this time, the transformation felt different than it ever had before. Power flowed through her like liquid fire, and when Ember emerged, she seemed larger and more solid than ever. The silver wolf's golden eyes locked onto Lydia's brown form across the circle, and something passed between them that had nothing to do with pack politics or personal grudges. This was predator recognizing predator, warrior acknowledging warrior, the primal assessment that preceded all serious combat. Marcus dropped his hand. Lydia launched herself forward with explosive speed, her powerful brown wolf form moving with the deadly precision of years of training. She aimed for Kira's throat in a classic dominance attack, intending to end the fight immediately with an overwhelming display of superior skill. But Ember was no longer where she expected to find her. The silver wolf moved with fluid grace that seemed to bend the laws of physics, flowing aside from Lydia's attack like water around a stone. As the brown wolf overextended herself, Ember pivoted with perfect balance and struck back with surgical precision, her claws raking across Lydia's flank in a move that drew blood without causing permanent damage. Gasps echoed through the arena. No one had expected the pack's outcast to demonstrate such refined fighting technique, least of all against an opponent of Lydia's caliber, but this was only the beginning. Lydia recovered quickly, her training asserting itself as she adjusted her strategy to account for an opponent who was faster and more agile than anticipated. She began using her superior size and strength to control the tempo of the fight, forcing Ember to respond to her attacks rather than dictating the flow of combat. For several minutes, the match proceeded as everyone expected. Lydia's experience showed in her ability to chain attacks together, to anticipate her opponent's movements, to gradually wear down Ember's defences through sustained pressure. Blood began to show on both wolves' fur, and it seemed only a matter of time before the inevitable conclusion. Then something changed. Kira could feel it happening. A barrier breaking somewhere deep within her consciousness, like ice cracking under pressure. The suppression spell that Elder Sage had described was fragmenting, and with each fragment that fell away, more of Ember's true nature emerged. Power flooded through the silver wolf's form, not just physical strength, but something deeper and more fundamental. This was the lunar authority that Elder Sage had claimed was Kira's birthright, the dominance that had been hidden for 20 years finally beginning to surface. Ember's movements became more fluid, more controlled, more absolutely precise. Where Lydia attacked with trained technique, Ember began to respond with instinctive knowledge that seemed to come from somewhere beyond individual experience. Her claws found weak points in Lydia's defences that no amount of formal training could have revealed. Her positioning became perfect, her timing flawless, her very presence beginning to radiate the kind of authority that made lesser wolves instinctively defer. The shift was so gradual that most spectators didn't notice it at first, but Alpha King Darian was not most spectators. From her position in the combat circle, Kira could see him leaning forward in the royal pavilion, his golden eyes fixed on Ember with an intensity that suggested he understood exactly what he was witnessing. This was not a lucky streak or a moment of inspired fighting. This was power awakening, authority asserting itself, a queen finally beginning to remember who she was. The end came suddenly. Lydia attempted a complex maneuver that should have ended the fight, a feint followed by a spinning attack that would have caught any normal opponent off guard. But Ember read the movement before it began, stepping into the attack rather than away from it, using Lydia's own momentum to send the larger wolf tumbling across the arena floor. When Lydia tried to rise, she found herself pinned beneath silver paws that seemed to carry far more weight than physics should have allowed. Ember's golden eyes blazed as she looked down at her defeated opponent, and for a moment every wolf in the arena could feel the pressure of absolute dominance radiating from her small form. Lydia, the pack's most accomplished young fighter, whimpered in submission. The arena fell completely silent. What they had just witnessed went beyond an upset victory or a lucky break. This was a fundamental reversal of everything they thought they knew about pack hierarchy, about strength and weakness, about who had the right to claim dominance over whom. Ember held the position for several heartbeats, making sure that every spectator understood what had occurred. Then she stepped back and allowed Lydia to retreat with what dignity remained to her. But as Kira began to shift back to her human form, she caught sight of Alpha King Darian rising from his seat in the royal pavilion. His expression was unreadable, but his golden eyes held a recognition that made her blood run cold. He knew. Whatever had just happened in that combat circle, whatever power had emerged to give her victory over a superior opponent, he understood its significance in a way that she herself did not. And judging by the way his massive war-wolf Fenris watched her with unwavering attention, she was no longer an anonymous outcast who could hope to fade back into invisibility. The Alpha King had found what he was looking for. The question now was whether that discovery would prove to be her salvation or her doom. The moment Kira shifted back to her human form, she felt it. A golden thread of awareness that had not existed moments before now stretched taut between her consciousness and something vast and powerful on the other side of the arena. The sensation was overwhelming, like being struck by lightning while drowning in honey, painful and ecstatic simultaneously. Her knees buckled as waves of foreign emotion crashed through her mind, carrying with them the scent of winter storms and ancient forests. Mate. The word echoed in her head, and she did not know if it came from her wolf or from the presence that now lived at the edge of her awareness. But she knew with absolute certainty that everything had changed in the span of a heartbeat. Across the arena, Alpha King Darian stood frozen in the royal pavilion, one hand gripping the railing with enough force to crack the wood. His golden eyes were wide with shock, and even from this distance Kira could feel his consciousness reeling from the same supernatural recognition that had just shattered her understanding of reality. The mate bond had snapped into place like a key turning in a lock that had been waiting centuries to open. Impossible, Beta Marcus breathed, but his voice seemed to come from very far away. The entire world had narrowed to the golden thread connecting Kira to the most powerful werewolf in the Northern Territories, and everything else felt distant and unimportant. Pack leader Harrison was speaking, declaring her the victor of the combat trial, but Kira barely heard him. The bond pulsed with each beat of Darian's heart, sending waves of sensation through her body that made it difficult to remain standing. She could feel his shock, his confusion, his desperate attempt to process what had just occurred, and underneath it all she could feel his wolf's absolute certainty that she belonged to him. The crowd began to disperse as the trials moved to their next phase, but Kira remained motionless in the centre of the arena. She could not have moved if her life depended on it. Every cell in her body was adjusting to the new reality of the bond, learning to accommodate a connection that felt both alien and utterly natural. "Come with me." The voice was quiet, but carried the full weight of alpha authority. Kira looked up to find Darian standing at the edge of the combat circle, his imposing figure backlit by the afternoon sun. He had left the royal pavilion to approach her directly, abandoning protocol in a way that would have been scandalous under normal circumstances. But nothing about this was normal. She managed to stand on unsteady legs, acutely aware of the way his presence affected her pulse and breathing. The mate bond amplified every sensation, making her hyper-aware of his scent, his proximity, the careful control he was exercising to keep his own reaction in check. He led her away from the arena without explanation, past the confused stares of pack members and visiting dignitaries who could not understand why the Alpha King would personally escort the victor of a minor combat trial. They walked in silence through the pack grounds until they reached a secluded grove where ancient oaks provided privacy from curious eyes. Only when they were completely alone did Darian turn to face her, and the full impact of the bond hit Kira like a physical blow. This close, with no distractions or barriers between them, she could feel everything he was feeling: the shock, the desire, the conflict between duty and supernatural compulsion that was tearing him apart. "This cannot be happening," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. "I am meant to choose a political alliance in 3 days. The stability of the Northern Territories depends on it." "I don't understand," Kira whispered, though part of her understood all too well. The mate bond was not something that could be negotiated or ignored. It was a force of nature, as immutable as gravity or the changing of seasons. "Your wolf," Darian said, his golden eyes searching her face with desperate intensity. "What is she? What bloodline carries that kind of power?" Kira thought of Elder Sage's revelations, of the suppression spell that was apparently weakening, of parents she had never known who had died to protect a secret she was only beginning to understand. "I don't know," she said, which was partially true. She knew what Sage had told her, but she did not truly understand what it meant to carry the Silver Moon bloodline, what responsibilities came with lunar authority, what dangers lurked in the shadows of her heritage. Darian stepped closer, and the bond sang with golden fire between them. "You defeated Lydia Silverpaw, one of the finest young fighters in this territory. Your wolf forced my warwolf to submit in front of hundreds of witnesses, and now the mate bond connects us with a strength I have never felt before." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "What are you?" Before Kira could answer, footsteps approached through the trees. They stepped apart quickly, but not quickly enough to avoid being seen together by the elegant woman who emerged from the forest path. Lady Elena Ravencrest was everything Kira was not: tall, beautiful, confident, and radiating the kind of refined power that came from generations of selective breeding among alpha bloodlines. Her auburn hair gleamed in the dappled sunlight, and her green eyes held the calculating intelligence of someone accustomed to getting exactly what she wanted. She was also, Kira realized with sinking dread, the woman Darian was supposed to mate in 3 days. "Your Majesty," Elena said smoothly, executing a perfect curtsy that somehow managed to convey both respect and possessiveness. "I was hoping to speak with you privately about the ceremony arrangements." The way she said privately made it clear that Kira's presence was both unexpected and unwelcome. Elena's gaze swept over her with dismissive contempt, taking in her plain clothes, her unremarkable appearance, her obvious lower status within the pack hierarchy. "Lady Elena," Darian replied carefully, his voice giving nothing away. "May I present Kira, the victor of today's combat trial?" "How interesting," Elena said, her tone suggesting that she found nothing interesting about it at all. "I watched your match from the pavilion. Quite an unexpected outcome." There was something in the way she spoke that made Kira's skin crawl. Not just dismissal or contempt, but a calculating assessment that felt predatory. Elena was studying her the way a hunter might study prey, looking for weaknesses and vulnerabilities. "I should return to the trials," Kira said quickly, desperate to escape the tension that crackled between the three of them. The mate bond made it physically painful to contemplate leaving Darian's presence, but the alternative, standing here while his intended mate evaluated her as a potential threat, felt even worse. "Yes," Elena agreed with false sweetness. "I'm sure there are dishes that need washing or floors that need scrubbing. The servants' quarters must be missing their most dedicated worker." The insult was delivered with surgical precision, designed to remind everyone present of exactly where Kira belonged in the social hierarchy. But instead of the shame and humiliation Elena clearly expected, Kira felt Ember stir within her mind with something that felt suspiciously like amusement. "Let her play her games," the Silver Wolf seemed to whisper. "She does not understand what she is dealing with." "Indeed," Kira said quietly, meeting Eleanor's green eyes with steady composure. "I should not keep you from your arrangements." She turned to leave, but Darian's voice stopped her. "Kira." When she looked back, his golden eyes held a message she could not quite interpret. "We will speak again." It was not a request. As she walked back toward the pack house, Kira could feel Elena's gaze burning into her back like acid. The beautiful Alpha's daughter clearly recognized a threat when she saw one, even if she did not yet understand the nature of that threat. But the mate bond pulsed with golden warmth in Kira's chest, a constant reminder that everything had changed. No matter what political obligations Darian faced, no matter what expectations the Northern Territories had for his choice of mate, the supernatural connection between them was not something that could be easily dismissed. That evening, as the pack celebrated the day's trials with feasting and ceremonial drinking, Kira remained in her quarters. The bond made it impossible to concentrate on anything else, filling her awareness with phantom sensations of Darian's presence even when he was nowhere nearby. She could feel his conflict, his desire, his growing desperation as he struggled to reconcile duty with destiny. A soft knock at her door interrupted her brooding. She opened it to find Elder Sage standing in the corridor, her ancient eyes bright with knowing. "The awakening has begun," the old woman said without preamble. "I can smell it on you, the scent of power emerging, of bonds forming, of destiny finally claiming what was always its due." "I don't know what to do," Kira whispered. "The Alpha King is meant to mate another in 3 days. The bond is not supposed to be possible." "Child," Sage said gently, "the moon goddess does not make mistakes. If the bond chose him for you, then there is a reason that transcends mortal politics and social expectations." She stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. "But you must be careful. Lady Eleanor comes from a family that has spent generations accumulating power through strategic alliances. She will not give up her claim to the throne easily, especially not to a servant girl she sees as beneath her notice." "What can she do?" Kira asked. "The bond cannot be broken." Sage's expression grew grave. "The bond can survive many things, child, but it cannot survive the death of one of its participants, and Elena Ravencrest is not known for her mercy toward those who threaten her ambitions." The warning sent ice through Kira's veins. She had been so overwhelmed by the supernatural connection to Darian that she had not considered the political implications, the enemies she might have made simply by existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. "What do I do?" she asked. "You survive," Sage said simply. "You grow stronger, and you remember that you are not the helpless servant girl everyone believes you to be. The Silver Moon bloodline has faced threats before and emerged victorious. Your power is awakening. Learn to use it." As the elder woman left, Kira settled by her window and stared out at the moonlit forest. Somewhere in the pack house, Darian was struggling with impossible choices. Somewhere else, Elena was likely planning how to eliminate a rival she did not yet understand. And here, in a servant's quarters that had always felt like a prison, Kira felt the first stirrings of something that might have been hope. The mate bond pulsed with golden warmth, promising that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she was no longer alone in facing them. The sacred grove felt different at midnight. Ancient oaks that had stood sentinel over werewolf ceremonies for centuries whispered secrets in a language older than memory, their branches swaying despite the still air. Elder Sage waited for her in the heart of the grove, where moonlight filtered through the canopy to illuminate a circle of standing stones that predated the pack's founding. Kira had come because the alternative, lying awake feeling the mate bond pulse with Darian's restless energy, had become unbearable. 2 days had passed since the recognition, and the supernatural connection grew stronger with each passing hour. She could feel his presence constantly now, a golden warmth at the edge of her consciousness that made concentration impossible. "You feel it awakening," Sage said without turning around. The old woman stood before an altar carved from black stone, its surface covered with symbols that seemed to shift and dance in the moonlight. "The power your parents died to protect." "Tell me about them," Kira said quietly. "Tell me about who they really were." Sage's weathered hands traced the ancient symbols with reverent care. "Your mother was Luna Aria of the Silver Moon bloodline, the most powerful female werewolf born in 3 centuries. Your father was her chosen mate, Alpha Kieran of the Northern Reach, strong enough to stand beside a Luna without being diminished by her strength." The names meant nothing to Kira, but something deep within her consciousness stirred in recognition. Ember lifted her silver head within Kira's mind, golden eyes bright with inherited memories that felt both foreign and familiar. "They ruled together for barely 5 years before the conspiracy began," Sage continued. "Other Alpha families feared what their union represented, a return to the old ways when lunar authority superseded all other claims to power. They could not allow the Silver Moon bloodline to reclaim its rightful place." "So they murdered them," Kira said, the words tasting like ash. "They tried to murder the entire bloodline," Sage corrected grimly. "Your parents, their advisors, anyone who carried even a trace of Silver Moon ancestry. It was meant to be a complete extermination, ensuring that lunar authority could never again challenge the established order." Kira felt cold despite the warm night air. "But I survived." "Because your mother was brilliant and your father was brave." Sage turned to face her, moonlight casting deep shadows across her lined features. "They knew the attack was coming, had prepared for it. Your mother performed the most powerful suppression spell in recorded history, binding your abilities so completely that even you would not know what you truly were. Then they sent you away with a trusted ally who died protecting your secret." The magnitude of the sacrifice hit Kira like a physical blow. Her parents had not only died to save her, they had condemned her to 20 years of believing herself worthless to ensure her survival. "The spell was meant to weaken as you reached maturity," Sage explained, "but something has been catalyzing the process, breaking the bindings faster than your mother intended. The mate bond, perhaps, or simply the approach of your 21st birthday." Kira thought of the increasing strength she had felt during the trials, the way Ember's presence had grown more solid and commanding with each passing day. "How much stronger will I become?" Instead of answering directly, Sage reached into her robes and withdrew a leather-bound journal, its pages yellow with age. "This belonged to your mother. She chronicled the extent of Silver Moon abilities, documented the powers that are your birthright." Kira accepted the journal with trembling hands. The leather was soft with age, and when she opened it, the pages released the faint scent of roses and winter storms. Her mother's scent, preserved across 20 years of separation. The first page was written in elegant script that seemed to glow with its own inner light. "For my daughter, should the moon goddess grant that she survive to claim her heritage, know that you were never broken, never worthless, never anything less than a queen among our people." The words blurred as tears filled Kira's eyes. To see written proof that she had been loved, that her existence had mattered to parents she could not remember, felt like a wound and a healing simultaneously. "Read," Sage urged gently. "Learn what the suppression has hidden from you." Kira turned the pages with growing amazement. Lunar authority was not simply dominance over other werewolves. It was the ability to command the very forces of nature that governed their species. Silver Moon descendants could heal injuries with a touch, compel truth from liars, communicate telepathically across vast distances, and in times of great need, channel the raw power of the moon itself. "This is impossible," she whispered. "If these abilities were real, I would have shown some sign of them before now." "Would you?" Sage asked knowingly. "Have you never healed faster than expected from injuries? Never sensed when someone was lying to you? Never felt drawn to the forest during the full moon in ways you could not explain?" As she spoke, Kira realized that all of those things had happened throughout her life. Small incidents she had dismissed as coincidence or imagination now took on new significance in light of her mother's journal. "The binding is weakening rapidly," Sage continued. "Within days, perhaps hours, your full abilities will emerge whether you are prepared for them or not. And when they do, those who killed your parents will realize their mistake." "Elena's family," Kira said with sudden certainty. "They were part of the conspiracy." Sage's grim nod confirmed her suspicions. "House Ravencrest led the alliance against your parents. Elena's grandmother was the one who identified your mother's location, who betrayed the Lunar's trust and made the assassination possible." The revelation sent ice through Kira's veins. The beautiful, calculating woman who was meant to mate with Darian in one day came from a bloodline of murderers. Worse, she likely knew exactly what Kira represented and would stop at nothing to prevent the Silver Moon heir from reclaiming her birthright. "What do I do?" Kira asked desperately. "How do I protect myself against enemies I can barely comprehend?" "You stop hiding," Sage said firmly. "You stop believing the lies they told you about your worthlessness and embrace the truth of what you are. The suppression spell protected you as a child, but now it has become a weakness that your enemies can exploit." She gestured toward the ancient altar. "Your mother left specific instructions for this moment. There is a ritual that can break the remaining bindings safely, allowing your power to emerge under controlled conditions, rather than in a crisis that might endanger everyone around you." Kira stared at the carved symbols with growing trepidation. "What kind of ritual?" "One that requires courage," Sage replied, "and absolute commitment to accepting your true identity. The suppression spell cannot be partially removed. It is all or nothing. Once we begin, there will be no going back to the safety of anonymity." The choice felt impossible. Embrace powers she did not understand and face enemies who had already proven willing to kill to stop her, or remain hidden and hope that Elena would be content with her political victory. But as she weighed the options, the mate bond pulsed with desperate urgency. Somewhere in the pack house, Darian was awake and tormented by the same supernatural connection that was driving her toward choices she had never wanted to make. "If I do this," Kira said slowly, "if I accept what you say I am, what happens to the Alpha King, to the mate bond?" Sage's ancient eyes held depths of knowledge that stretched back centuries. "The moon goddess does not make mistakes, child. If the bond chose him for you, then his destiny is intertwined with yours in ways that transcend mortal politics." "Elena will try to kill me." "Yes," Sage agreed without hesitation. "She will try. The question is whether you will face that threat as a helpless servant girl or as the Lunar Queen you were born to be." Kira looked down at her mother's journal, at the elegant script that described powers beyond her wildest imagination. For 20 years she had accepted the pack's judgment that she was broken, worthless, a mistake that survived through charity. But the truth written in these pages painted a very different picture. She was not nobody. She was not nothing. She was the last heir of the Silver Moon bloodline, and it was time to stop hiding from that truth. "Tell me what I need to do," she said quietly. Sage smiled, and for the first time since Kira had known her, the expression held genuine warmth. "Stand in the centre of the circle. Open your mind to Ember's consciousness completely. No barriers, no resistance, no fear of what she might show you. Kira moved to the altar as instructed, feeling the ancient stones pulse with energy that made her skin tingle. The moonlight seemed brighter here, more focused, as if the celestial body were leaning closer to witness what was about to unfold. "Now," Sage said, beginning to chant in the same ancient language that had made Ember howl with recognition days earlier. "Remember who you truly are." The words washed over Kira like liquid fire, awakening memories that did not belong to her, but to her bloodline, her ancestors, the proud generations of lunar queens who had ruled with wisdom and strength. Power began to flow through her veins like molten silver, burning away the last vestiges of the suppression spell that had defined her existence for 20 years. And in the moment before the transformation reached its peak, Kira felt the mate bond flare with golden intensity as Darian's consciousness brushed against hers across the distance that separated them. He knew. Somehow he could feel what was happening to her, could sense the magnitude of the change taking place in the sacred grove. The last of the bindings shattered, and Lunar Kira of the Silver Moon bloodline opened her eyes to embrace her destiny. The awakening left Kira fundamentally changed. When she returned to her quarters in the pre-dawn hours, she moved with a fluid grace that had never been hers before. Silver light seemed to shimmer just beneath her skin, and her eyes held depths that spoke of ancient wisdom suddenly made accessible. The suppression spell's destruction had not just revealed her powers, it had reconnected her to centuries of inherited knowledge that flowed through her consciousness like a river of liquid starlight. But with power came danger. She could feel them now, the watchers in the shadows, the enemies who had spent 20 years believing the Silver Moon bloodline extinct. Elena's presence burned like acid at the edge of her supernatural awareness, a mind filled with calculation and barely contained rage. Others moved in the darkness as well, allies of House Ravencrest who had helped orchestrate her parents' murder and would not hesitate to finish what they had started. The mate bond pulsed with desperate urgency as Darian's consciousness reached across the distance separating them. He had felt her transformation, sensed the magnitude of power that had been unleashed in the sacred grove. Through their connection, she could feel his shock, his awe, and underneath it all, his growing understanding of the political catastrophe that was about to engulf them both. 3 days of secret training followed, hidden moments stolen between her regular duties when Elder Sage could guide her in accessing abilities that felt both foreign and natural. Healing touch came easily, too easily, as if her hands remembered techniques her mind had never learned. Truth compulsion proved more difficult to control, but when she mastered it, lies became impossible to hide from her perception. The telepathic abilities were the most overwhelming, opening her awareness to the minds and emotions of every werewolf within a growing radius. It was through this expanded consciousness that she sensed the attack before it came. The 4th night after her awakening, Kira lay in her narrow bed, listening to the pack house settle into sleep around her. The mate bond hummed with Darian's restless energy. Tomorrow was the day of his planned mating ceremony with Elena, and his internal conflict was tearing him apart. She could feel his desperate desire to find some way out of the political trap that duty had constructed around them both. Then she felt them approaching. 3 minds filled with murderous intent, moving through the corridor outside her quarters with practiced silence. Professional killers, their thoughts disciplined and focused on a single objective: eliminate the Silver Moon heir before she could threaten the established order. Kira rose from her bed without sound, her enhanced senses tracking the assassin's movements with predatory precision. They had lockpicks for her door, silver-blessed blades for her throat, and contingency plans for disposing of her body where it would never be found. This was not a crime of passion or political opportunism. This was an execution carried out by experts. The first assassin slipped through her door with ghost-like stealth, his blade catching moonlight as he moved toward where he expected to find her sleeping. But Kira was no longer there. She had learned something crucial during her training with Elder Sage. Lunar authority was not just about commanding other werewolves. It was about channeling the primal forces that governed their entire species, including the enhanced speed and strength that came with partial shifting while maintaining human form. The assassin never saw her coming. Silver light exploded from Kira's hands as lunar power flowed through her without restraint. The killer's blade melted in his grip as supernatural heat radiated from her skin, and when he tried to scream, her truth compulsion forced honesty from his lips instead. "Who sent you?" she demanded, her voice carrying an authority that made his will crumble. "Lady Elena," he gasped, unable to resist the supernatural compulsion. She knows what you are, cannot let you live to claim—" The second assassin burst through the door as his partner collapsed, but Kira was ready for him. This time she did not hold back. Power flowed through her like liquid starlight, transforming her human form into something luminous and terrible. Her eyes blazed with silver fire as lunar authority manifested in its purest form. The killer's mind shattered under the weight of her presence. Ancient instincts buried deep in werewolf consciousness recognized what stood before him, not a servant girl or political inconvenience, but a lunar queen in the full glory of her awakened power. He dropped his weapon and fled, his sanity broken by exposure to dominance beyond his ability to comprehend. The third assassin never made it through the door. Kira's expanded awareness had located him in the hallway, and with a thought she reached out through the telepathic connection that linked all werewolves to their Luna. His nervous system simply shut down, leaving him unconscious but alive, a mercy she granted more from inexperience than compassion. When the immediate threat had passed, Kira stood among the aftermath and tried to process what had just occurred. She had defended herself using abilities that felt both completely natural and impossibly foreign. The lunar power flowed through her like breathing, but the magnitude of what she could do was still overwhelming. More importantly, Elena's attempt at assassination had failed spectacularly. Instead of eliminating a hidden threat, she had forced Kira to reveal the true extent of her awakened abilities. Word of what had happened would spread through the pack house within hours, reaching the ears of every werewolf present for the mating ceremony. The mate bond flared with desperate urgency as Darian's consciousness slammed into hers across the distance. He had felt the surge of power, sensed the danger she had faced, experienced second-hand the moment when lunar authority had manifested in all its ancient glory. Through their connection, she felt him moving, leaving his quarters, striding through the pack house with predatory purpose, his own power radiating outward in waves that made lesser wolves instinctively clear his path. He reached her door within minutes, not bothering to knock before entering. The sight that greeted him, Kira standing luminous with residual power among unconscious assassins, confirmed every suspicion that had been growing since the mate bond formed. "Luna," he breathed, and the word carried recognition, reverence, and desperate relief. This was not just acknowledgement of her title, but understanding of what she represented, the return of a power that had been thought lost forever. "They tried to kill me," she said quietly, though part of her knew he had already felt everything through the bond. "Elena sent them." Darian's golden eyes blazed with fury that made the air around him shimmer with heat. "She will answer for this, before the ceremony begins, before she can claim any protection from political alliance. She will face judgment for attempted murder." "No," Kira said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "This is not your battle to fight. She came for me because of what I am, because of the threat I represent to everything her family has built on the foundation of my parents' graves." She looked down at her hands, still faintly glowing with silver light. I am not the helpless servant girl everyone believed me to be. I am Luna Kira of the Silver Moon bloodline, and it is time I started acting like it." The declaration hung in the air between them like a challenge to destiny itself. Through the mate bond, she could feel Darian's amazement, his pride, his desperate desire to stand beside her as she finally claimed the throne that had always been hers by right. But she could also feel his anguish at the impossible situation they faced. In a few hours, political obligation would force him to mate with the woman who had just tried to have her murdered. The supernatural connection between them meant nothing in the face of territorial treaties and alliance negotiations that had been years in the making. "There has to be a way," he said quietly. "The moon goddess would not create a bond this strong only to tear it apart through mortal politics." Kira felt something shift in her consciousness as Elder Sage's training merged with her awakened lunar authority. There was a way. Ancient laws that predated modern pack politics, rights that belonged to the Silver Moon bloodline regardless of what others might have built in their absence. "Tomorrow," she said, silver light beginning to dance around her again, "Eleanor Ravencrest will learn what it means to threaten a Lunar Queen, and everyone gathered for your mating ceremony will witness the return of powers they thought safely buried 20 years ago." Through the mate bond, Darian felt the absolute certainty that radiated from her awakened consciousness. This was not hope or desperate planning. This was destiny finally preparing to collect what it was owed. The servant girl was gone forever. In her place stood someone who remembered at last that she had been born to rule. The morning of the mating ceremony dawned with an ominous beauty that felt like nature itself holding its breath. Crimson sunrise painted the sky, the colour of spilled blood, and mist clung to the forest floor like the ghosts of ancient battles. The pack house buzzed with frantic preparations as servants arranged ceremonial decorations and visiting dignitaries took their places for what they believed would be a routine political alliance. They had no idea they were about to witness the return of lunar authority to werewolf civilization. Kira stood at her window, watching the activity below with senses that now extended far beyond normal perception. Through her awakened consciousness, she could feel the emotions of everyone preparing for the ceremony: excitement, anticipation, political calculation, and underneath it all, the growing undercurrent of unease as news of last night's assassination attempt spread through whispered conversations. Elder Sage had arrived before dawn with ceremonial robes that had belonged to Kira's mother, silver silk that seemed to capture and reflect moonlight despite the bright morning sun. The fabric felt alive against her skin, responding to her lunar authority with subtle shifts of luminescence that marked her as something far beyond what anyone expected. "Are you ready for this?" Sage asked, her ancient eyes bright with something that might have been pride. "I have been ready for 20 years, Kira replied, and realised the truth of those words as she spoke them. Every moment of humiliation, every instance of being dismissed as worthless, every year of believing herself broken. It had all been preparation for this moment when she would finally claim what had always been hers by right." The mate bond pulsed with desperate energy as Darian's consciousness reached across the distance separating them. Through their connection, she could feel his internal torment as duty warred with destiny. Political obligation clashed with supernatural compulsion. In a few hours, he was expected to pledge himself to Elena Ravencrest in front of hundreds of witnesses, binding himself to the very bloodline that had murdered her parents. But ancient laws existed that predated modern pack politics, and Kira had spent the night studying every word her mother had written about lunar rights and royal prerogatives. The ceremonial arena had been transformed for the mating ritual, with white silk banners and golden rope, marking the sacred circle where vows would be exchanged. Visiting alphas filled the honoured seats, their colourful ceremonial dress and pack banners creating a festival atmosphere that felt obscene given what was really at stake. At the centre of the elaborate setup sat 2 thrones, one for the Alpha King, carved from black oak and inlaid with silver, the other slightly smaller but no less magnificent, waiting for the woman who would become his Lunar Queen. Elena Ravencrest stood beside the smaller throne, resplendent in emerald silk that complemented her auburn hair and green eyes. She looked every inch the perfect political mate, beautiful, poised, radiating the kind of refined authority that came from generations of careful breeding among alpha bloodlines. The smile she wore for the crowd was warm and gracious, giving no hint of the murder she had attempted just hours earlier. But Kira could see deeper now. Her awakened abilities pierced through Elena's carefully constructed facade to the rage and desperation that churned beneath. The woman knew her assassination attempt had failed, knew that her intended victim had not only survived, but emerged more dangerous than ever. "Honoured guests!" Pack Leader Harrison's voice boomed across the arena as he stepped forward to begin the ceremony. "We gather today to witness the joining of 2 great bloodlines, the forging of an alliance that will bring stability and prosperity to all the Northern Territories." Polite applause rippled through the crowd, but Kira noticed the undercurrent of tension that ran beneath the celebratory atmosphere. Word of last night's events had spread despite attempts at discretion, and many of the assembled wolves seemed more interested in searching the crowd for threats than celebrating the upcoming union. "Alpha King Darian Blackthorn," Harrison continued, "step forward to claim your chosen mate and Lunar Queen." Darian rose from his throne with fluid grace, but even from her hiding place at the edge of the crowd, Kira could see the reluctance in his movements. The mate bond made it impossible for him to genuinely desire another woman, no matter what political necessity demanded. His golden eyes swept the assembled guests with barely concealed desperation, as if searching for some miracle that would free him from this impossible situation. "Lady Eleanor Ravencrest," Harrison called, "step forward to accept the bond and crown of Lunar Queen." Elena moved toward the centre of the ceremonial circle with triumphant confidence, her emerald silk trailing behind her like spilled poison. This was her moment of ultimate victory, not just claiming the Alpha King as her mate, but ensuring that the Silver Moon bloodline could never again threaten the power structure her family had spent decades constructing. But as she took her place beside Darian in the sacred circle, a voice rang out across the arena with authority that made every wolf present freeze in recognition. "I invoke the right of challenge." The words carried such power that several of the weaker-willed spectators actually whimpered in submission. This was not just supernatural dominance, this was lunar authority in its purest form, the voice of ancient royalty reclaiming what had always belonged to it. Kira stepped from the shadows at the edge of the crowd, her mother's silver robes catching and reflecting light in ways that seemed to defy natural law. The transformation from anonymous servant to revealed royalty was so complete that many of the assembled wolves did not immediately recognize her. But those who did, Elder Sage Beta Marcus, Pack Leader Harrison, stared in shock at the magnitude of power that radiated from her small form. "What is the meaning of this?" Elena demanded, her carefully controlled facade cracking as rage broke through her political composure. "Guards, remove this servant from the ceremonial grounds immediately." But the guards who moved to obey found themselves frozen by lunar authority that made their muscles lock in place. Kira's power flowed outward like a tide, touching every werewolf consciousness in the arena and reminding them of instincts buried so deep they had forgotten they existed. "I am not a servant," Kira said, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the arena, despite its conversational volume. "I am Luna Kira of the Silver Moon bloodline, daughter of Alpha Kiran and Luna Arya, rightful heir to authorities that predate your modern pack politics by centuries." Gasps and cries of disbelief rippled through the crowd. The Silver Moon bloodline was supposed to be extinct, wiped out 20 years ago in what history books recorded as a tragic accident. The idea that an heir had not only survived, but had been living among them as a servant was almost too shocking to process. "Ah, impossible!" Elena snarled, her mask of gracious politeness finally falling away completely. "The Silver Moon line ended with the death of Arya and her mate. There are no survivors." "There is one," Kira replied calmly, and silver light began to dance around her form as lunar power responded to her will. "The one your grandmother tried so hard to murder, the one your family has spent 20 years believing safely buried with her parents." The accusation hit the crowd like a thunderbolt. Elena's face went white as the implications sank in. Not just that the Silver Moon heir lived, but that House Ravencrest's involvement in the original assassination was about to be exposed before every important werewolf in the Northern Territories. "You dare accuse my family of—" Elena began, but Kira's truth compulsion slammed into her consciousness with the force of a physical blow. "Tell them!" Kira commanded, her voice carrying supernatural authority that made resistance impossible. "Tell them about your grandmother's role in locating my parents. Tell them about the conspiracy to eliminate the Silver Moon bloodline. Tell them about the assassins you sent to my quarters last night." Elena's mouth opened against her will, compelled by lunar power to speak truths she had spent her entire life concealing. Grandmother helped them find—" She told them where to— The confession died as Eleanor bit down on her own tongue hard enough to draw blood, using physical pain to break through the supernatural compulsion. But the damage was done. Everyone present had heard enough to understand the magnitude of the conspiracy that had shaped the last 2 decades. "By the ancient laws," Kira continued, stepping into the ceremonial circle with authority that made both Darian and Eleanor instinctively move aside. "By right of blood and lunar inheritance, by the bonds of destiny that cannot be broken by mortal politics, I challenge Lady Eleanor Ravencrest for the right to mate with Alpha King Darian Blackthorn." The challenge hung in the air like a blade suspended over the throat of the established order. This was not just a personal dispute or political manoeuvring. This was the return of lunar royalty, the resurrection of powers that had been deliberately buried, the moment when destiny finally came to collect what it was owed. Elena's green eyes blazed with hatred as she realized the trap that had been sprung around her. She could refuse the challenge, but that would be an admission of weakness that would destroy her political standing forever. She could accept it and lose, facing not just personal defeat, but the exposure of her family's crimes. Or she could accept it and win, ending the Silver Moon bloodline once and for all. "I accept your challenge," Elena said, her voice carrying across the silent arena. "Trial by combat, as is traditional. The winner claims the Alpha King and the throne. The loser—" "The loser dies," Kira finished quietly, and her silver eyes held no mercy as she met Elena's gaze across the ceremonial circle. "Just as my parents died 20 years ago." The arena erupted into chaos as the implications of what they were about to witness finally sank in. This would not be a simple sparring match or demonstration of fighting skill. This would be a battle to the death between the last heir of ancient royalty and the descendant of those who had tried to destroy her bloodline. And everyone present understood that they were about to witness either the final extinction of lunar authority or its triumphant return to werewolf civilization.